Hey guys, it's Miss Katz, and today we are going to be doing the Unit 8 MSG page 14A. This is page 14A. All right, we're going to start talking about solving one-step equations involving integers. And really, we have all the pieces of the puzzle that we need to make this happen. I'm just going to show you what it looks like when we involve some negative numbers. So if we start with an equation that looks like this, remember we always ask ourselves, what is happening to the variable? And in this case, the variable is being added by 5, positive 5. And in solving equations, we always look for the inverse operation. So what is the opposite of adding a positive 5? Subtracting a positive 5. So this is subtracting a positive 5 from both sides of the equation. What you end up with on this side is negative 10 minus 5. And remember, subtracting a positive is like adding a negative. And when we add the two negatives together, we add them and keep the sign. So that's where this r equals negative 15 comes from. Okay? And to check it, it works the same way that it did before. We're going to substitute. So the negative 15 goes in for r, which is what we did right here. And we add positive 5 to it, and we should get negative 10. Well, these are two different signs. So we keep the sign of the one with the biggest absolute value, which is here, and then we subtract. And since negative 10 is equal to negative 10, we know we got it right. All right, let's take a look at what's going on over here. So in this case, we're going to do a little magic before we do anything else. This is p minus a negative 3 equals negative 6. Well, before we do any manipulation, let's get rid of all this negativity over here, right? Subtracting a negative is the same as adding a positive. So I've just rewritten that subtraction in the addition format. And then I'm going to work from there. Well, how do I get rid of adding 3? We're going to use the inverse operation, which is subtracting 3 from both sides. And when we do that, we get that p equals negative 9. And again, to check it, negative 9 minus a negative 3. Subtracting a negative is like adding a positive. Which one do I have more of? Negatives. How many more? 6. Once I know that both sides are the same, I'm all good. All right, let's do one together, and then I'm going to have you pause the video, and you'll be able to practice these on your own and come back and check your answers. All right, so here, x minus 13, subtracting a positive is like subtracting a positive 13, we're going to add a positive 13 to both sides. I apologize. X equals, all right, so here I've got more negatives. How many more negatives do I have? 9. So x will equal negative 9. Now to check that, negative 9 minus 13 should equal negative 22. Subtracting a positive is like adding a negative. And when you add them together, you get negative 22, which equals negative 22, and that's good to go. Let's just do one more sample to make sure we're all on the same page, okay? So here, before we do any magic, let's change this over. Subtracting a negative is like adding a positive. And how do I undo the addition? I subtract on both sides. So x should equal 6. Let's plug that in. 6 minus a negative 4 should equal 10. Subtracting a negative is like adding a positive. And since 10 does equal 10, we know we're good. I want you to pause the video here, and I want you to try the rest of these problems on this page, and I will come back to the video, and we'll go over the answers. All right, so by now, you should have completed the rest of this page, and now I'm going to do the same. So this equation, we are adding. The opposite of addition is subtraction. That's the inverse operation. And when we do that, we're going to get y equals negative 2 minus 16. We don't have rules really in algorithm for subtraction, so we're going to change this to addition. So subtracting a positive is like adding a negative. And again, I'm using those parentheses just to help me keep my numbers in order, make sure that those negative signs travel where they need to go. And since both of them are the same sign, we're going to add them together and keep the sign. So y equals negative 18. And then we're going to plug it back in. So negative 18 plus a positive 16 should equal negative 2. I have more negatives than positives. And how many more? 2. And since 2 equals negative 2, I know I'm good to go. All right, z plus a negative 5 equals 12. So here we're adding a negative 5. So we are going to subtract a negative 5 from both sides. All right, so z will equal 12 minus negative 5. So we're going to add the opposite. So it's 12 plus 5. So Z will equal 17. And then to check it, we're going to plug it in. 17 plus a negative 5 should equal 12. I have more positives than negatives. How many more? 12. Since 12 equals 12, I know I'm good to go. All right, let's take a look at question number 6. So here I'm adding a negative 7. The inverse operation of that is subtracting a negative 7. And I always do that on both sides. So T will equal negative 5 minus negative 7. Subtracting a negative is like adding a positive. Here I have more positives than negatives. And how many more? 2. So T should equal 2. I'm going to do the check over here because I'm running a little short in space. 2 plus negative 7 should equal negative 5. I have more negatives than positives. How many more? 5. Since negative 5 does equal negative 5, I know I've got it right. All right, let's take a look at number 7. So we are subtracting negative 12, and let's change that to an addition problem first. So subtracting a negative is like adding a positive. How do I undo the addition of positive 12? I'm going to subtract 12 from both sides. So R will equal negative 17 minus 12. And we don't, we have to change this to an addition problem. So R equals negative 17. We are subtracting a positive. That's like adding a negative. So R will equal negative 29. Remember that they're the same sign, so we keep the sign and add them together. And then to check it, we plug it back in. So negative 29 minus negative 12 should equal negative 17. We're going to change negative 29. We're going to change subtracting a negative into adding a positive, and you get negative 17. So when you do this, we know our answer is going to be negative. I have more negatives. I have 17 more negatives. And now I know I'm good. All right, let's take a look at this last row. In number 8, we're adding 23. To undo adding 23, we subtract 23 from both sides. And J will equal 54 minus 23 is 31. And then to check it, we just plug it in. 31 plus 23 should equal 54. And since it does equal 54, I know I'm good. Question number 9. We're going to subtract a positive 14. So the inverse of that is adding 14 to both sides. Y will equal 23. I can check it by doing 23 minus 14 should equal 9. That does equal 9, so I know I'm good. And the last one on this page, we are adding a negative 13, so we are going to subtract a negative 13 from both sides. So this becomes E equals negative 2 minus negative 13. Negative 2, we are subtracting a negative, so I'm going to add a positive. And I have more positives than negatives, and I have 11 more. So E will equal 11. Then we're going to plug that back in. So 11 plus negative 13 should equal negative 2 if we did this right. I have more negatives than positives, and I have 2 more. So I'm good to go. Alrighty, we're going to move on to the next page. Okay, now we're going to do some mixed practice. So we're looking at some addition, some subtraction, some equation solving, some substitution. It's all things that we've already done. And I'm just going to kind of walk through them real quickly. So starting at the top, we're adding. I have more positives than negatives, and I have 2 of them. Here, we're adding. Same sign, keep the sign, and add them together. Here, I'm subtracting. So this becomes 3 plus a negative. Negative 7. Remember, subtracting a positive is like adding a negative. I have more negatives than positives, and I have 4 of them. All right, let's take this one at a time. So a negative 2 plus a positive 2. Well, if you owe me $2 and you give me $2, that's 0. And then we're adding another negative 2 and a positive 2. This whole thing will end up being 0. And if you're struggling with that, do them separately. Negative 2 and a positive 2 make a 0. 0 plus negative 2 is negative 2. And negative 2 plus positive 2 is 0. All right, here, 4 plus 9 is 13. And we still have to add negative 14. I have more negatives than positives, and I have one of those. Here, I have more negatives than positives, and I have 118. Here, we're going to change subtraction into addition. So subtracting a positive is like negative. Oops. Since they're both negative, we add them and keep the sign. All right, here, 6 plus negative 2. I have more positives than negatives, and there's 4 of them. Oops, minus negative 3. Subtracting a negative is like adding a positive, and that equals 7. 0, subtract a negative. So instead of subtracting a negative, we're going to add a positive. And down here, we're adding 2 of the same sign, so we keep the sign and we add them together. Here, negative 20, and we're not taking anything away, so we just have negative 20. Here we'll take it one at a time. So negative 30, subtract a positive is like adding a negative. Subtract a negative is like adding a positive. So we've changed the whole equation into addition. A negative 30 and a negative 2 make a negative 32, and we're adding a 20. So we have more negatives than positives, and it happens to be that we have 12 more. Over here, we take the absolute value first. So the absolute value of negative 13 is 13. The absolute value of 13 is 13. And when I subtract, I get 0. Here, let's take it one step at a time. 6 plus a negative 4. Okay, so there's more positives than negatives. And everything else will just stay the same. We're just using the order of operations here. 2 plus 9 makes 11, plus negative 2. And what do I have more of? Positives. How many more? 9. And then this last one in this set, negative 5. We are subtracting a positive, so we're going to add a negative. Since they're both negatives, we keep the sign and add them together. All right, in the second section here, all we're doing is we have to substitute before we can solve. So these problems are essentially the same as above. There's just one extra step. We have to find the right number to fill in for the variable. So r is equal to negative 5. Okay, so we're subtracting a positive. That means we're going to add a negative. When I do that, they're both the same sign. So we add them together and keep the sign. Here, t is negative 6. And s is 11. So we're subtracting a positive. That's just like adding a negative. Since they're both negatives, we add them and keep the sign. S is 11. We're going to subtract negative 8. So subtracting a negative is like adding a positive. Here, t is negative 6 minus negative 5. Again, we use those parentheses just to make sure that those negative signs don't get confusing. Okay? Subtracting a negative is like adding a positive. I have more negatives than positives, and I have one extra. S is 11. T is negative 6. We're subtracting a negative, so I'm going to add a positive, and we just add them together like we have for most of your life. R is negative 5, and we're subtracting 11. We are subtracting a positive, so I'm going to add a negative. Since they're both negative, we keep the sign and add them together. All right, and these last 3 problems are all equation solving. So it's just like the page that we just did. So here we're subtracting a negative. We're going to add a positive. And then to solve the equation, since we're adding 4, to undo that, we're going to subtract 4 from both sides. We're using inverse operations. And x will equal 3. Now I can check that by plugging it in. 3 minus negative 4 should equal 7. Well, subtracting a negative is like adding a positive. And since 7 does equal 7, we know we're good. All right, the next question here is number 23, and we are going to do y. Since we're adding 3, we're going to subtract 3 from both sides. So y will equal negative 12 minus 3. So we're subtracting a positive. It's like adding a negative. So y equals negative 15. Because remember, the same sign, we keep the sign, and we add them together. To check it, it's going to be negative 15 plus a positive 3 should equal negative 12. I have more negatives, 12 more of them to be exact, and since they're the same, I know I'm good to go. And the last problem in this set, we are subtracting a positive 5, so we are going to add a positive 5 to both sides. So z will equal negative 15 plus 5. Well, there's more negatives than positives, and there's 10 more. So z should equal negative 10. And to check it, negative 10 minus 5 should equal negative 15. And so I'm going to kind of climb up here. Negative 10, subtracting a positive is like adding a negative, and that should equal negative 15. And negative 10 and negative 5 together, we keep the sign and we add them. And since we get the same thing on both sides, we know we're good. All right, guys, I hope you're set. Tomorrow we will have a quiz on this material, so make sure you understand it and ask me any questions if you need to. Have a great day.